Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And this should be the last session we have with this particular section of the book, Umdatul Talib. This is Kitab al-Janaiz. Just a few thoughts to go over here. And the last time we were together, we talked about, or we introduced the idea of offering condolences, or I should say after the burial, what happens. Imam Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَنُدِبَ إِصْلَاحُ طَعَامٍ لِأَهْلِ مَيِّتٍ يُبْعَثُ بِهِ إِلَيْهِمْ ثَلَاثًا. So we did discuss this previously, but just to kind of pick up where we left off and continue into visiting the graves and offering condolences, he says it's recommended to prepare food and send it to the deceased's family for up to 3 days and no more. Anything beyond that is considered disliked. Anything beyond those 3 days. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, prepare food for Ja'far's family, for they are now busy. You find this reported by Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, and in Sunnah Tirmidhi as well. وَكُرِهَ لَهُمْ فِعْلُهُ لِلنَّاسِ. It's disliked that they do so for people, meaning the family of the deceased. It's disliked that they prepare food for others. Ahmad related that Jarir said, we considered visiting the deceased family in groups and eating food after the burial as a form of niyaha, which is impermissible. So the idea is that the family that is bereaved, they've just had someone pass away, they become busy with those funeral processions and also managing their emotions. And so the community should be supporting them by preparing food, etc. Not the bereaved family of the deceased preparing food so that others can come and enjoy at their home or the masjid or a greeting place so that they can offer condolences. No, it's the other way around. The community is going to support the family that's suffering from a loss. It's disliked that the family prepare the food. Now we talk about visiting the graves. He says, وَتُسَنُّ زِيَارَةُ قُبُورٍ. It's recommended to visit the graves. لِغَيْرِ نِسَاءٍ. Except for women. So here we're looking at a recommendation that is exclusive to men. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the idea of this here. So, recommended to visit the graves. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala cites a consensus on this, meaning it's recommended to visit the grave. Everyone agrees upon this, or the majority. This is based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, who said, I prohibited you from visiting the graves, now visit them. This report is Sahih Muslim and Sunnah Tirmidhi. Additionally, it was reported that he ﷺ said, it will remind you of the hereafter. It's also reported that the Prophet ﷺ visited his mother's grave. And we know that she passed away before prophethood. And she was buried in a little city called Abwa. And so, while he was there, well, this is much later on in life, he visited her grave. He cried while he was there visiting her grave, causing everyone around him to cry as well. And he said, I sought permission from my Lord to seek forgiveness for her, but it wasn't granted. I sought permission to visit her grave, and he permitted me to do so. So visit the graves. So here he's commanding the believers to visit the graves, for it will remind you of death. Muttafaqun alayh. So visiting the graves is recommended. In general, it's permitted to visit the grave of a non-Muslim as well. Permitted. So it's recommended to visit the graves, and it's permitted to visit the grave of a non-Muslim. The visitor is, however, if they're visiting the grave of a non-Muslim, is not permitted to give them salam, like what we're going to talk about shortly. A non-Muslim can also visit the grave of a Muslim. They shouldn't be prevented from doing that. If there's no reason to prevent them, then they shouldn't be prevented, just like they shouldn't be prevented from visiting a Muslim while they were alive. they shouldn't be prevented from visiting the grave of a Muslim after they passed on. All right, so the next section obviously has to do with, as he says, لِغَيْرِ نِسَاءٍ. It's apart from women folk, meaning the recommendation of visiting the graves apart from women folk. It's considered disliked, according to the madhab, for women to visit the graves. Again, this is the study of the Hanbali madhab. You may have heard something else, something different, and if that's what you grew up with and you're comfortable with following that and that's your way, then you do your way. But this is according to the school of Imam Ahmad. It's disliked for women to visit the graves. It's been narrated, and this is based on narrations, of course, and how they utilize those narrations to arrive to these conclusions. It's been narrated by Atiyah. She said, radiyallahu anha, we were prohibited from visiting the graves, and I mentioned this hadith before, but we were not made to stay away. We were told, don't go, but we weren't stopped, basically, from going. So it's disliked as a general rule. If it's known that a woman visiting the grave will cause some sort of prohibition or an infraction, she will commit some type of haram, then her visiting the grave is haram. It takes the same ruling because it's a medium, it's a means to commit haram. And we understand that based on the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah's curse be on the women who visit the graves. So you have to take all of the ahadith related to visiting the graves or the prohibition thereof for women, and you have to bring them together to arrive at a conclusion here. So this hadith clearly states that Allah's curse be upon the women who visit the graves, and it's understood the women that visit the graves that do things that are impermissible. So visiting in this case, as a means to commit haram, the visit itself takes on the same ruling. If a woman were to unintentionally pass by a grave, like it's on her route to work or she's going somewhere and she passes by the grave, and she were to send prayers of peace upon its dwellers, then this is hasan, this is fine, this is no problem, this is not like makruh, because she didn't go out with the intention to visit the grave. She just happened to pass by it and she sent her greetings or her prayers upon those that were the dwellers of the graveyard. There's nothing wrong with that. There's an exception to this, and that is the visitation of the Prophet's grave and his two companions, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhuma. So we know that it's recommended to visit his grave as part, or I should say, after concluding the rites of Hajj or Umrah. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever makes Hajj and visits me. And this hadith is a general instruction to make Hajj and then to visit the Prophet ﷺ. And so this is all inclusive of both male and female, giving the females an exception to the general rule of being disliked. In this case, to visit the grave of the Prophet ﷺ is recommended. Now when you visit the grave, the one that's visiting the grave is recommended to stand in front of it, or to stand close to it, close to the deceased, like they would stand close to a person while they were alive. So you go visit, you get close to the grave, and Imam al-Bahuti says, وَيَقُولُ إِذَا مَرَّ بِهَا, and this is when visiting or when passing by, there's a prayer that can be said. Assalamu alaikum ahl al-diyar min al-mu'minin wa inna insha'Allahu bikum lalahiqun yarhamallahu al-mustaqdimina minkum wal-mustakhirin nas'alullah lana wa lakum al-afiyah Allahumma la tahrimna ajrahum wa la taftinna ba'dahum waghfir lana wa lahum. So here, this has been reported authentically from the Prophet ﷺ. He says, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum ahl al-diyar min al-mu'minin. Believers of this abode. By the will of Allah, bimashi'atihi, we will be joining you. May Allah have mercy upon you. May He shower you with His rahmah upon the first of us and the last of us. We ask that Allah grant us and you afiyah, which is like well-being. O Allah, do not deny us their reward, and do not test us after them, and pardon us and them. So this is the prescribed supplication that one would make when they visit or pass by the graves. And note that the beginning is Assalamu alaikum. And we said when you visit the graveside of a non-Muslim, you wouldn't greet them with Assalamu alaikum. Something interesting to note, that great Imams were intentional about mentioning this in the particular section of this book and other works. He said the deceased can hear speech. The deceased in the grave can hear speech and knows who visits them, especially on Friday, after Fajr, before sunrise. This was mentioned by Imam Ahmad. It was also mentioned in Al-Ghunya. This is the book by Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah ta'ala. It's mentioned that they know all of the time, not just Friday, after Fajr, before sunrise, but they are aware and know all of the time. This specific time mentioned by Imam Ahmad is something that is more stressed than other times. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that the deceased, they know who visit them and can hear them speaking. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said that there is overwhelming evidence demonstrating that the deceased are aware of their family and friends in this life. And all of that, what's happening with their family and friends, is presented to them. They also know what happens around them, and they're happy with what is righteous, and they're annoyed and harmed, saddened by what is deplorable. Right? So sometimes you might be thinking about a deceased loved one. It could be a parent, or someone that you honored and respect in your family. That's something to remember, that they're happy when they know you're doing well and that you are living a good life, a righteous life. And they're saddened and they're annoyed, they're hurt when they know that you're living a bad life. He says, وَتَعْزِيَةُ مُصَابٍ. And we're talking about the ta'ziyah, which is kind of like condolences, if you will. And this is recommended, right? Wa here, tusannu ta'ziyatu musabin, basically is what he's saying here. It's recommended to offer condolences to the afflicted. And musab is the one that's been afflicted by the death of a loved one or some other type of affliction. So the affliction here would be like, since we're talking about death and dying, you offer condolences to the person that has been survived by their loved one. And these condolences can be offered either before or after the burial. You don't have to wait, but they can be offered either before or after. And this is based on a hadith which states that there is no Muslim who offers condolences to his afflicted brother except that Allah will shroud him in clothes of honor on the day of resurrection. You find this in Sunan ibn Majah, right? Encouraging us to offer condolences. And the condolences that are offered, this ta'ziyah, is a means for the one offering them to encourage the bereaved to be patient for their reward and to make dua for the deceased, so long as the deceased was Muslim. Because you're going to, in your condolences, you're going to say dua for them if they're Muslim. If they're not Muslim, then there's another thing that you can do. It can be said, may Allah magnify your reward. A'dam Allahu ajrak. You're talking to the musab, the person that's been afflicted with this passing. Wa ahzana azak. May he make your bereavement well or good. Meaning like it's patient and you get through it. And pardon your deceased. He says, وَغَفَرَ لِمَيِّتِكَ, and pardon your deceased. So that's the dua you're making for the deceased, asking for their forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what you would normally say when offering condolences to a Muslim who has been afflicted by the death of another Muslim. If you were to give condolences to a Muslim for their deceased disbeliever, right? They might have somebody in their family that's not Muslim, okay? You would not include pardon your deceased. You would say, A'dam Allahu ajrak wa ahzana azak. Right? May Allah magnify and multiply your reward and make your bereavement good and well. You wouldn't say, وَغَفَرَ لِمَيْتِكَ, because they died as a non-Muslim. Anything else appropriate that you believe would be helpful in the situation can be said as a form of condolences, because there was nothing related specific here. This is just what is commonplace. But if you wanted to say something else, then you're certainly welcome to say that. When offering condolences to a non-Muslim for the passing of a Muslim, right, there's a non-Muslim, they have a Muslim relative that's passed away, you would say to them, may Allah make your bereavement well, right? Ahzan Allahu azak. وَغَفَرَ لِمَيِّتِكَ. You're not going to say أَعْظَمَ اللَّهُ أَجْرَكَ, because you're giving these condolences to the non-Muslim. أَعْظَمَ اللَّهُ أَجْرَكَ. What ajr? Right? You would say, أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ عَزَاكَ وَغَفَرَ لِمَيِّتِكَ. And then if you were offering condolences to a non-Muslim for the passing of a Muslim, and there's a difference of opinion as to whether you should do that in the first place or not, some have reported that you can say anything related to worldly matters, but not related to reward of the musab or pardon of al-mayyit. Right? So you could say anything, may Allah give you replace them, or give you a long life, or bless you in your wealth, or because all of those things don't really mean anything. There's not a great deal of value in a long life in this world, especially if you're not faithful, or more money and more wealth. We know that as people of faith, I mean, that's got its place, but it's nothing like, you know, what's the reward in the hereafter. But anyway, those types of words can be said, again, to soften the blow and to try and calm the person down. And the bereaved, the person that's suffering from the deceased state, they should respond to that supplication. Istajab Allahu du'ak wa rahimana wa iyak. Basically saying, may Allah answer your prayers and shower us and you with His rahmah. You can also send condolences in writing. If you're unable to visit and do it in person, you can send your condolences in writing. Write a nice letter or an email, or send a text message, or whatever you think would be appropriate. And then if you're the receiver of those condolences, you're not obliged to respond by writing. You can just make the dua for them. Respond verbally. It should be understood that if you're offering condolences, this is another thing to understand. If you offer condolences in writing, you're not there in person, have the assumption that the person is going to respond. Don't hold them to the fire that, hey, you need to write back. Because look, the time is not right. They're going through something. The time is not right to expect them to be on the phone, responding to everybody. It's okay, thank you very much. You know, it's just like you got to have some intelligence, some emotional intelligence in these scenarios, so that you know, you don't get worried with people. Again, like serving the food or bringing food for 3 days, it's disliked to offer condolences more than once or after 3 days have passed. More than once, so once you've offered your condolences, khalas, that's it. And if you haven't done so within that 3-day period, then you should not offer those condolences after that 3-day period, because doing so is likely to reopen a wound that's trying to be healed. Unless you were away, you weren't there to offer the condolences, and you came back into town, and the opportunity presented itself, and then you offered those condolences to, you know, probably like a friend or someone that would probably be glad to hear them from you, even if it was such a time out. That's the exception to the rule there. But in general, after 3 days, you need to let people move on and start healing. And the more you're talking about it, and the more you're reminding them of it, the more that it's going to be on their mind. So you can see in Islam, we're not talking about this in detail, but in our religion, there are tools and techniques that we have been given by the divine to get over trauma. Okay, well, there are tools and techniques. There is therapy in our religion. Okay, for us to get over hardship and trauma and loss, to deal with grief. We have that in our faith. It's there. And this is just one of those examples of that. You know, acknowledge what's happened, be a support, be a help, receive support, receive help, go through the grieving period, you know, have people, you know, show you and pray for you. But then we start moving on. We start carrying on. Right? So that's there. There's no need to seek external therapy. You may need help with how to go through the process as a Muslim from a Muslim source. There's there's probably plenty of people that they don't know how to cope with these things in the Muslim way. But it's important to understand that there is a Muslim way to cope with grief and loss and hardship. So the first thing that we typically want to do is, due to a lack of knowledge, we assume, okay, I need to go to an external source. So I'm going to go get a therapist, somebody that has no idea what I believe or how I believe or my religion or my practice, just somebody that's a licensed therapist, and they're going to help me get through these problems. And you have no idea what they're going to be plugging in to your brain and your heart, especially at the very vulnerable moment of your life. So that's an important note to walk away with here. Concluding here, he says, وَيَحْرُمُ نَدْبٌ وَنِيَاحَةٌ وَلَطْمُ خَدٍّ وَشَقُّ ثَوْبٍ وَنَحْوُهُ لَا بُكَاءٌ. He says here some of the things that are impermissible, and that is nadb, which is mentioning good qualities of the deceased in a certain way, and niyaha, which is wailing, replete with the same lamenting and mentioning the good qualities of the deceased. And this is something that they used to do in the past. In fact, they would write in their wasiyah that this happened at their funeral. I want so-and-so to go and praise me and wail over me and cry and lament and make a big show of my passing. And so that was, something that they used to do as a way of it's almost a way of boasting and bragging. This is something that's impermissible. Tearing the clothes and striking the cheeks, this is also something impermissible. That's what they would do, get out there and make the scene, rip open the clothes, start slapping on their faces, and they would do other things. They shave their head, all kind of different practices. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited all of this. He said, he who slaps his cheeks, tears his clothes, and follows the way of the traditions from al-Jahiliyyah is not one of us. This is in Sahih Bukhari, Muslim. It's also reported that the Prophet ﷺ disavowed himself from a woman who wails loudly, shaves her head, and tears at her garment. Also in Sahih Bukhari, Muslim. And in Sahih Muslim, it was reported that he cursed the one who performs niyaha, as well as the one who listens to it. Some of our scholars have said that niyaha, this type of wailing, replete with the lamenting and mentioning of these qualities, good qualities, is harmful for the deceased. It harms the deceased when somebody does this. Shaykh al-Islam mentioned this. And some of the scholars, min al-Hanabila, he said that it harms them if they requested it be done for them. So they talked a great deal about this because it was a tradition from the times of ignorance. And some have made an excuse, if you will, or a concession if there's a little bit of mentioning of good qualities, as long as it's truthful. That's just meager in amount. He was a great person. As long as it's not done in excess, or it's false, right? It's done very, very modestly, then that would be an exception to the rule there. He says, وَلَا بُكَاءٌ لَا بُكَاءٌ وَيَحْرُمُ, mentions these things, لَا بُكَاءٌ, meaning crying is not. Crying is not haram. Crying is not disliked. It's not even makruh. Crying is considered jaiz. It's mubah fil madhab. It's permissible. Some may say it's mustahab even. Some of the scholars, they say it's mustahab to cry. Rahmatan, right, as a form of mercy. As this was reported from the Prophet ﷺ. Anas saw the Prophet ﷺ crying, and he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah doesn't punish anyone for the tears their eyes shed or the sadness in their heart, but punishes or shows mercy or shows rahmah due to this, and he pointed at his tongue. Muttafaqun alayh. Basically, this is found Sahih Bukhari, Muslim. Basically, how you respond verbally and what you would respond to is inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That's what's recommended at the time of affliction. Someone passes away or another hardship or trial that befalls you. That's the response. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. The bereaved can also offer 2 rak'ah in prayer. This was done by Ibn Abbas, and he recited, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. A person can offer prayer. So that gives you another, here again, emphasizing this point. Here are some other tools to get through hardship and grief in our religion. These are some of the therapy techniques. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is tremendous. Even though it's easy to say, it's tremendous in helping you move on. If you just say it, it's obviously something that can be habitual. But if you understand it and you believe in it, then it puts things into perspective. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It put things into perspective that the loved one has died, your child has died, your spouse who you are just over the moon about has died, and now a person could fall into this depression and questioning and why and doesn't deserve and too young and not right and not fair. But a person that says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, there's none of that. There's none of that why and how come and what for and it's not right and they didn't deserve and they're too young and there's nothing to say. Inna lillah. It's not mine. That person's not mine. They weren't stolen from me. They belong to Allah. Even my own life is not, it's not inherently, intrinsically mine. I didn't bring myself into this world. I didn't give myself life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take my life whenever He so wills. So this again is another form of that therapy that we have. And then to pray. This is one of the greatest forms of therapy a person can utilize, is in prayer. To pray. This was to bring joy and peace into the heart of the believer. As Allah says in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, and seek assistance and patience in prayer. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. It's also reported that the Prophet ﷺ would offer prayer whenever he was sad. This is collected by Imam Ahmad, as well as found in Sunan Abi Dawood. So this is a general recommendation here. Prayer when you're sad. Prayer when you're happy. Prayer when you're grateful. Prayer when you're worried. Prayer when you have to make a decision. Prayer, it's there. I mean, that's the ultimate tool. And it's disliked that the afflicted change their general state. Their general state, like how they present themselves, what they're doing. So to change their clothes, like now I'm going to, I don't know, I'm not going to wear these nice clothes anymore because I'm sad and I'm depressed. And so now I'm going to stop washing and bathing and stop taking care of myself. I'm going to stop wearing shoes. I'm going to, whatever it may be, or I'm going to quit my job. What's the point? I'm going to give up and I'm just going to become, a burden. So these things are disliked to react to hardship in such a way, but instead, a person should respond with patience, forbearance, and utilize the tools that have been given in our faith, alhamdulillah. And that's going to conclude the session for this evening and wraps up this chapter on funeral prayers. Jazakallah khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Wa akhiru da'wana. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.